Hello, and welcome to today's Live on Web program, 2018 Government Outlook. I'm Eugene Mulero, Congressional Reporter for Transport Topics. 2018 has the potential of becoming a big year for freight transportation on Capitol Hill. Anywhere from infrastructure to autonomous policy, transportation will have a place in the national conversation. For starters, the leaders of the funding committees are likely to consider a meal and rest break provision whenever they take up a long-term funding bill. We thought we were going to see that bill at the end of the week. It turns out Congress will likely advance it sometime next month. We'll dive into that topic and others in this program, including self-driving vehicles, the chances of advancing the Trump administration's infrastructure bill, and the regulatory landscape for trucking, with a focus on ELDs and CSA. To help me sort out these issues, I spoke with Congressman Sam Graves, a Missouri Republican and the chairman of the Highways and Transit Subcommittee in the U.S. House, and Bill Sullivan, Executive Vice President of Advocacy at American Trucking Associations. And joining us in the studio to my left is Jeff Davis, Senior Fellow at the Eno Center for Transportation, and to my right, Eric Miller, Federal Policy Reporter at Transport Topics, who will serve as my wingman for the day. As we kick off the discussion, we invite you to participate by emailing us questions and comments to share@ttnews.com. Let's begin with government funding and the provision on F4A. Jeff, I turn to you first. Yes or no, will there be a government shutdown at the end of the week?
It's a strong possibility. I can't give it a definitive yes or no. The funding for most federal agencies runs out at midnight Friday night, January 19th. In the House, the Appropriations Chairman last night introduced a bill that would extend all the funding through February 16th, 4 weeks, and would also suspend applicability of some Obamacare taxes that are about to be implemented for 2 years to get conservatives on board, and extend the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, for 5 or 6 years, up to 2022, I think, to try to get at least some Democrats on board. And they're going to see if they've got the votes to pass that Thursday midday in the House. Democrats, through Mr. Hoyer, have indicated that they're not going to vote for it because it doesn't do anything to deal with the DACA provision of children who were brought to the U.S. And have grown up here but were not documented when they were brought in.
That's really what's been dominating the contention here,
yeah,
immigration.
Yes, that's the program. President Trump has said he's going to stop the program March 31st. However, a district judge in California issued a ruling last week nationwide that would overturn that. Trump's going straight to the Supreme Court, but that has thrown a little confusion in there, as have President Trump's less than temperate remarks kind of blew up the negotiations last week. So the Democrats do not want to let full year appropriations get enacted without the DACA issue being resolved. The question is, are they going to force the issue, especially in the Senate, now, or wait until the budget's closer to fruition?
And then if they go with this short-term funding bill, what would have been the must-pass piece of legislation is the long-term, and that's where the special interests wanted to see the F4A bill.
They can't write full-year appropriations until they know how much money they have to spend. And the president and the congressional leaders have been talking for 2 months now about how much more money they're going to give defense and then how much more money they have to give non-defense in order to have Democrats allow this to happen, because it takes 60 votes in the Senate to set the spending levels. And so right now, the House appropriations bill for FY18 includes the F4A provision that the trucking industry wants. The Senate bill does not. But they haven't begun to negotiate that or any of the other issues. They can't negotiate any big issues for any agency until they know how much money they're going to have and how much will trickle down to each department, and they can trade it amongst programs, et cetera. Last year, the F4A provision was the very last provision negotiated between the House and Senate in the Omnibus Appropriations Bill, and it was down to the wire, and the Democrats in the Senate managed to win that, and it was not in the final bill. So we'll see. I know that the majority leader of the House, Mr. McCarthy, from California, is very insistent that the provision get in this time.
He's a champion of this.
Yes, but we're going to have to wait and see They got to give the appropriations committees money, then wait 2 or 3 weeks for them to write bills, and I expect the F4A will be one of the last provisions held out this year as it was last year.
And we should tell people F4A stands for the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, and ATA is the proponent to make sure that this is part of federal legislation. Why is this something that the Federation is looking for, Eric?
Well, I mean, this dates back to the F4A Act, which was passed in 1994.
Yeah.
It basically gave trucking, interstate trucking, an exemption from anything that might affect their prices, routes, or services. And since then, California has started or passed a law that required truckers to take a break, and all other employees in the state for that matter, to take a 30-minute break after 5 hours. This conflicts with the federal requirement that they take a break after the first 8 hours. So they can make deliveries, say, within 6-hour time period without a break. And some of the drivers don't like it because they lose their flexibility. And this has been, the battle has been waged in the courts. And it's mostly been losing as far as ATA and its constituents has been losing in the lower courts. And then the Ninth Circuit in 2015 also rejected that it was an exemption, and so therefore the California law was still in effect. The latest battle has turned to the legislature, as you know, where ATA and its supporters are trying to get a law that would allow the federal requirement to be the mainstay for truckers.
Exactly. And we spoke with Bill Sullivan of ATA. I sat down with him recently, and he talked about the whole concept of pushing for uniformity, and I believe we have the video.
But with that said, we do have some issues that we feel pretty good about. F4A, the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act of 1994, or preemption provision that we're seeking right now in Congress, is still in front of us. We tried like crazy to win this in the end of last Congress, and the appropriations bill, the vehicle in which it was best suited, did not pass in any robust way. And so this CR that was into January is right now our focus. And so the CR runs out January 19th. The coalition with whom we work, the coalition that we lead, an F4A coalition, has been working very hard on this. We have discussed the merits of this within every corner of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate committees. We've also discussed it an awful lot with the administration as we've built up a better working relationship with not just the Department of Transportation, but within the White House. And so we are leaving no stone unturned in our efforts to highlight how important this is for the industry.
What indications are you getting from members of Congress that the F4A will be part of this upcoming funding deal?
Key members of Congress prioritize this. And so one example would be Kevin McCarthy from California, the majority leader in the House. This has been a key priority of his. Much of the ability to succeed in playing on an appropriations process depends on what the context is when the bill passes. And so is it an omnibus or a standalone bill? Is it one that involves a lot of compromises, or one that is sort of a partisan push through? And we anticipate that this bill is going to have to be fairly bipartisan, and that there will be a lot of compromise. So we hope that the conditions are such, and we hear from members of Congress that this is very high on their priority list. We have met with the Speaker and the Majority Leader. We have met with Majority Leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, his staff. We have met with, and members of our coalition, not just ATA, have met with Democratic leadership, both in the House and Senate. And so we are hearing positive leanings, but again, so much of this depends on the context when the bill actually passes and the conditions that are going. So as an example, I would say if funds for building a wall on the southern border, or some immigration provision was the most focused debate at the time of passage, it may take a little steam out of some of the efforts that F4A proponents have, as well as for this myriad of, I say myriad, many dozens of other legislative attempts that are attracted by the appropriations process every year. So I don't read tea leaves. I do the best we can to, if a door opens, we're able to walk through it. You know, how do we make the case as best we can, as bipartisan as we can, and how do we work to win it? We had heard really favorable information last year as Congress worked into the omnibus process, and the context at the end didn't play out the way we needed it to. I'm very proud of the work that both ATA and the coalition did. But the conditions weren't there when the bill was finished on a Saturday and over a Saturday night into a Sunday. And so we're doing the best we can to be where we are. We hear positive feedback from the champions of the bill. I think Senate engagement this year is more than it was last year, and that was a key point that we thought would be difficult. Senator Deb Fisher sent a letter, I forget the exact number, but I want to say 33 senators wrote to Senator McConnell and Senator Schumer, the majority and minority leader in the Senate, saying we need to take care of this. And so we've spent a lot of time on the Senate side while continuing to shore up our House friends, and I feel pretty good about it. But with that said,
and that was ATA's Bill Sullivan. We'll hear from him again shortly. We have a question from Tim Waugh. It's on F4As. Will something get done at a federal level in 2018 on F4A to create this exemption from the patchwork of state laws? Eric.
Yeah, well, that's going to depend a lot on the legislation, on the bill that's forthcoming that ATA is trying to get passed. I doubt that regulators will change anything. I think California will still hold to its tenets, and so will the federal regulators. So that would be all pretty much dependent on the legislation that could go through Congress.
Okay. Let's turn now to another big topic. This is a carryover from 2017. It's actually been in the works for many years, but it's autonomous technology and self-driving vehicles. The House and Senate, both committees of jurisdiction, advanced legislation on self-driving vehicles. The House passed it out of the chamber. The Senate is still debating this, and the trucking industry is not too pleased that it felt it was left out of this round of negotiations. Give us a state of play of where we are right now, Jeff.
The chairman and both committees in charge of this have been trying to go for unanimity, and so far it's been working. The House passed its autonomous vehicle bill, the entire House of Representatives, by voice vote, no public dissent. And in the Senate, their AV bill passed the Commerce Committee unanimously. They're in the sort of battle of the acronyms. I forget which is which. One chamber's bill is called, the acronym is AV START, and the other chamber's acronym is Self-Drive. So we're, battle of the acronyms. But Senator Thune, who's the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, has tried to bring his bill to the Senate floor and pass it unanimously. There are a couple of holds. Now I think the only remaining holds are on the Democratic side, but about the whole lack of affirmative regulation of the AV sector, because the bills, both the House and Senate bills, are very light on regulation, and some people don't like that. But there was a discussion in the Senate committee to include autonomous CMVs and trucks in the legislation. That didn't get offered because it became clear that if that got offered, it was going to destroy the bipartisan unanimity of the bill. And so we'll see if it comes up later in the process.
And let's tell people why we're here. We're here because the technology sector, the industries have really taken the forefront and the lead on this issue, and they're advancing the vehicles. Trucking's already testing platooning, and they already have the self-driving technology and advanced beta levels. So this is Congress catching up to this, right?
Yes. I mean, there's no substitute for thousands and millions of hours of on-road testing when you're going to do something as fundamental as allowing vehicles to drive themselves. As far as allowing self-driving trucks, the issue tends to be one of labor unions, because truck driving jobs are some of the best, solid, middle-class jobs available anywhere in the U.S. for people without a college education. And seeing 10, 20 years down the road how you could have a massive disruption of the demand for truck driving jobs has caused the Teamsters and other unions to really try to get out front on this issue of trying to find some way to avoid those disruptions in their labor market. So I think if you're going to see down the road the AV legislation expanded to include allowances for self-driving trucks, there's going to have to be something else in there to address those labor disruption issues before Democrats will allow legislation to get passed.
What's the expectation that the Senate is going to, or what's on your radar? When is the Senate going to take this up?
Senator Thune tried to do it at the end of December, and then again didn't quite get it. And they're negotiating behind the scenes with the senators who have issued objections. There was one Republican senator who had a concern about auto dealers and how they're going to be treated, and but the bigger issues were on the Democratic side. And at some point, theoretically, Senator Thune could try to get the bill moved through the regular process. If you can't get unanimous consent, you can go through the regular process, but that's very time-consuming, and the Senate can only do one bill at a time that way, and nomination taken forever. So the Majority Leader McConnell really doesn't want to have to spend a week of the Senate's time just dealing with this bill. So Senator Thune will either try to get the bill negotiated, changed, and passed unanimously, or else attach it to something else. Possibly the infrastructure package we'll be discussing later on in this show, perhaps something else.
And we heard recently from Secretary Chow that she's going to, the U.S. Department of Transportation is going to come up with an update of the autonomous vehicle guidelines, and she gave a timeline of sometime this summer. And what we're talking about here is safety. This is the safety regulators who want to have a seat on the table and look at ways of improving safety through the motoring public, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, safety is one of the pluses of this. Of course, you know, we don't know how far off it is, and I wonder what the actual taste for this is in Congress. I mean, the public obviously might have a fear of a truck going down the highway without a driver. And I think for some time it's going to be driver assisted for a long time. Some of the discussions I've seen, they're talking maybe 15 years down the road. And even then, maybe the industry might not adopt it widespread, because you really have to use this on the interstates. Once you get off the interstates, then it's harder to use an autonomous truck.
And the industry is really pushing to include make sure that the trucker, the driver, always has a role to play in this.
Right.
To elucidate on that, again, I sat down with Bill Sullivan of ATA. He gave us a state of play on the autonomous stuff.
You know, I believe the trucking industry is not yet represented in the Commerce Committee reported bill. The House Energy and Commerce Committee did a similar effort that has passed the House with trucking specifically excluded, which we were not happy about at all. You know, it is our strong belief, and most people that we interact with on the committees that have jurisdiction, be they transportation committees or safety-related committees, so whether Energy and Commerce, Transportation and Infrastructure in the House, or Senate Commerce Committee, or the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, most of the members and staff understand that passenger cars and commercial vehicles share the roads. And so if there are going to be incentives and rules surrounding how the country will support innovation to increase safety and improve markets and innovation, that it strikes us as absurd that you would have one focus on passenger vehicles, light-duty vehicles, and a separate focus to the point of exclusion of commercial vehicles. And largely also, as Chris Spears testified, and I in almost all of my meetings and all of ATA staff discusses, if there are to be technologies, automation and technologies that are adopted in cars, trucks, commercial vehicles, the adoption rate in commercial fleets and commercial vehicles and the OEMs that supply them tend to adopt more quickly than, in fact, whether it's a large car OEM, you know, General Motors, foreign car companies, Mercedes or Toyota, or just to pick a few, customers are evaluating whether it's worth $5,000 or $2,500 to have a steering wheel that buzzes or to have a special kind of braking system. And I've heard anecdotal evidence that there are really high rates of turning those systems off because people don't like the beeping and the buzzing. And So in commercial fleets, the adoption rates and the safety benefits are a business proposition and not an emotional proposition. And so we really do believe that commercial vehicles are likely to drive some of the largest safety improvements as there's adoption. So we continue to press that issue. I believe that the conditions are going to be better as we come into this year, partly because as the Commerce bill, Senate Commerce Committee bill has moved to the floor, it's slowed down. There's not unanimity, and there is recognition not only of our issue about commercial vehicles, but also of concerns that some safety advocates have about other specific things. And so the committee and the Senate has not yet coalesced around a consensus piece of legislation, would be my read and review on sort of where we are. As they haven't, I believe it is an opportunity now for that consensus to still develop. While it didn't develop on the committee or within the committee, I do believe that there's a chance that we can do this. There are also new players in the game. And so one example is John Tester. Senator John Tester, Democrat from Montana, just joined the Commerce Committee. John Tester is the only CDL holder in the Senate and has been a champion on not every issue for trucking, but a number. And so F4A is one great example where he understands trucking. And so we do think that we always have the opportunity to make the case with the people who pay the closest attention. His is a new face. We've seen the announcement that Chairman Schuster, House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman Schuster, is going to retire. Among the people who might replace him would be two who are reported to be pretty interested in succeeding him, would be Congressman Jeff Denham from California, Congressman Sam Graves from Missouri. Congressman Graves has expressed a deep interest in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee digging more deeply into this. At this point, we don't know if that could be hearings or could be legislation, but it gives us hope that this debate isn't closed and that we have an opportunity to dig deeper in terms of policy making on automated vehicles for commercial vehicles.
Thank you, Bill Sullivan of ATA. You can check out my whole conversation with Bill at the same page as LiveOnWeb, ttnews.com. And we have a question from Brian Copeland on autonomous. So to be clear, he asked, what is being discussed in Congress at present does not include anything to do with trucks. Jeff?
That is correct. Neither the bill that has passed the House unanimously last year, nor the bill that's pending in the Senate presently addresses autonomous trucks at all. There are definitely senators who want to add that to the legislation before it passes, and we're going to wait and see if they can negotiate some kind of compromise with the senators who are more concerned about the labor issues to try to get that achieved.
I know former EPW chairman James Inhofe of Oklahoma and the chairwoman of the Trucking Policy Committee, Deb Fisher of Nebraska, that we're calling for this.
Yes.
And what, give us a look at the tech companies. The tech companies are the big players here.
Yeah, there could be other developments relating to trucking legislation that are pushed by or debates started by tech interests later this year or next year. Anyone who has received a bunch of packages from Amazon, like I have, knows that the boxes come, there's a lot of air in there. So the trucks used by Amazon tend to cube out and have every cubic inch of cargo space filled far before they ever get close to their weight limit. So Amazon is interested in longer trucks, in twin 33s. At the other end, you have Tesla, who are trying to produce electric trucks, electric long-haul trucks. And they're already pushing the 80,000 pound limit. And because of the large and heavy batteries that will be required to have long-haul electric trucks, Tesla is considering asking for an exemption from federal weight limits that just applies to electric trucks. So if the tech companies wind up reigniting the old size and weight debates that tend to get the railroads in to counter, as an opponent and drag everything else down, we'll wait and see if those debates happen later this year.
And that's going to be a huge topic of discussion, especially around the trucking industry.
Yeah, and much like the legislative track, DOT, the Department of Transportation, has not yet come up with a truck-specific policy yet. Most of the policy so far, the regulatory policy, has been the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration,
Yeah.
and it hasn't been truck specific. At some point, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration will come out with a truck specific regulatory policy.
DOT is also, under Secretary Chow, trying to go to their next, the department-wide AV Policy 3.0 that's going to address cars and trucks and buses, get all of the various surface modes under one organized regulatory framework, I think.
Mm-hmm. So that's size and weight and autonomous technology. Let's segue now to one of the best favorite topics of conversation on Capitol Hill and throughout Washington, infrastructure. We got the Chamber of Commerce hosting a big event this week, tomorrow. They're expected to, again, call for a fuel tax increase. I talked to the Chamber this morning. They have other option that they're going to push. But this is something that President Trump has been looking to do for a while. There is some anticipation that there's going to be a bipartisan spirit around infrastructure. What do you think? You think that sometime next month we're going to have a plan after the State of the Union address and it's going to spark the conversation?
The National Economic Council, the White House, under Chairman Gary Cohn and then the infrastructure point man, DJ Gribbin, has been working for the last year on a fully fleshed out infrastructure plan. And it got delayed last year because the congressional leaders told him, wait till after tax reform is done. Tax reform didn't get done until Christmas. We've been waiting all month so far for the White House to roll this out. We were heard it might happen this week, now maybe next week.
Yeah.
The week leading up to the State of the Union address is traditionally when the White House rolls out big, bold proposals, and that's going to be January 30th. And then the president's budget for fiscal 19 is due Monday, February 5th, and that's also used to roll out proposals, because any proposal that requires money has to be incorporated in the budget somehow. So if it's going to be done in 2019 at all, they're going to have to give out a lot of specifics sometime around State of the Union and Budget Week. The NEC's plan is about 60, 70 pages of real detail. The other problem is that they're getting some pushback from Republicans on the Hill that they don't want the administration to put too many specifics in their plan, because some of them are obviously not going to be popular. And the more specifics are in the White House plan, the more the plan's opponents can pick it to death. So we're still not sure if we're going to get a 60-some page document or 12 pages of bullet points or something in between sometime in the next 2 weeks.
And the whole big argument now is, how do you pay for this? And this is a long-standing argument. And Trump, if you listen to DJ Gribbin, he hasn't ruled out increasing the fuel tax. Do you think, Eric, that's a viable point of conversation on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I know. So far we've heard that it's going to be, in general, the $1 trillion bill with $800 billion in private investment. I wonder, do you have a sense, Jeff, of if that investment, the White House has been saying, you know, they're waiting to come in, private investment. Do you have a sense that it's going to happen?
It's not private investment. The plan was, from last year, $200 billion in real federal money that will leverage 800 non-federal, not just private, but state and local. And that's the big issue. Now, there's a lot in the administration's plan to further encourage and enable public-private partnerships. The problem is the president himself keeps throwing shade on the whole concept. He has said in public at a meeting at the White House, and then again, supposedly, to the Senate and House leadership at Camp David a week and some ago, that he doesn't think public-private partnerships work most of the time. Mm-hmm. And then Gary Cohn, the head of the NEC, will get up the next day and push PPPs again. So we're still not quite sure the extent to which the plan that the NEC has developed all year is liked by the president himself. And then the other agencies, DOT, Commerce, the Corps, EPA, are supposed to get behind this plan. But if the White House isn't, if the president isn't going to make them get in line, I'm not sure what can be done.
Do you have a sense if there's the political will for a gas tax increase in Congress?
If you give it if we could have secret ballots, it would probably pass, but we don't.
That's right.
The Speaker Ryan, in particular, in the House, has been very insistent that the gas tax not be increased. And the problem is we have dickered and delayed for 20 years, and fuel efficiency with CAFE standards has gotten to the point that, just to tread water, you're going to have to do at least a 12 to 15 cent gas tax immediately just to keep the highway trust fund solvent. Because after 2020, the Highway Trust Fund is going to need $20 billion a year above the current tax levels just to tread water. And most of the stakeholder community, the Chamber of Commerce and others, have been insistent for the last year that new programs are nice. A new infrastructure package of new programs is nice. But priority number one should be to make sure the existing Highway Trust Fund programs stay solvent after the expiration of the FAST Act's bailout in 2020. And then once that's done, you can pay for everything else. And the belief is also that if you're going to raise the gas tax, keeping the Highway Trust Fund solvent with current programs should be the first thing that you devote new gas tax revenue for. And then $200 billion in new programs outside the trust fund should be second priority. So there's still no real agreement on that, either on Capitol Hill or in the stakeholder community.
I think back of a conversation that former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood had with some media outlets shortly after Trump was elected. And his argument was that the stars and planets are aligned for that tough vote on a fuel tax increase. You've done some scholarship on this, the recent efforts to raise the gas tax. Do you agree with that consensus that that the planets and stars are aligned, like they were for Reagan and they were for Clinton?
Every time the gas tax has been increased, it's taken, first of all, strong presidential leadership. You know, Eisenhower in '56 and '59, and then Reagan in '82, and then George H.W. Bush in 1990, Clinton in 1993. The last two of which were about general fund deficit reduction and not about transportation first.
Correct.
I'm not getting a sense that President Trump is willing to be the #1 flag waver running down the street trying to rally his base for a gas tax increase. He might sign it if Congress went ahead and did it, but I'm not seeing the groundswell of Congress to increase the gas tax by the amounts that would be needed in the absence of strong, and again, strong presidential leadership by presidents who had a much higher approval rating at the time than Trump does now, who actually could have maybe brought voters in support of those policies. So,
what I see coming back into the conversation are these earmarks. And when I hear earmarks, I always think of that classic case, the bridge to nowhere. That was that effort that former Senator Stevens wanted to fund a bridge in Alaska.
it was actually Don Young. It wasn't any Ted Stevens' money, but the House rules prevent members from trying to repeal old earmarks, and Senate don't. So Stevens was stuck defending it because the Senate rules are different.
Notwithstanding my PTSD on the whole earmarks debate, is that something that you think is going to gain some momentum, and you're going to see the House Republicans really call for the earmarks and make them black and white again?
Right now, as we speak, the House Rules Committee is still holding a hearing in which members are coming in talking about whether they believe earmarks should be brought back or not. Part 2 of the hearing is tomorrow. That will feature testimony from outside experts as to, and Chairman Sessions of the Rules Committee, obviously, who takes orders from the Speaker. And this, the Rules Committee is called the Speaker's Committee. Speaker tells the majority members what to do. And Sessions is asking for proposals on how earmarks could be brought back with greater transparency than in the past, with protections against particular clunker projects and things like that. So there is, they're going to sound it out. But the problem is that the Drain the Swamp caucus does not want earmarks brought back. They think it's a backsliding on what they were elected to do in 2010, and so there's a lot of resistance. The same called the Congressional Freedom Caucus. The hardcore Trump supporters in the House of Representatives are not buying it.
And both of you have been in Washington for many years. This is an election year. We know what happens after the August recess during an election year. Really nothing gets done. When you take that into play, how realistic is it that a big policy legislation on infrastructure reaches the president?
Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty hard to tell. I guess it's going to depend on which way the debate goes. I'm not sure, really, myself.
What do you think?
They've got a window of about 3 months coming up here. We've also got to get fiscal 18 done. But the problem is that the original Trump plan from a year ago, it was in their budget, the $200 billion, didn't have a specific pay for attached to it. There were a lot of different Trump proposals that would spend money and a lot of different pay fors, many of which had to do with Obamacare repeal, but they weren't associated with each other. So if the president comes up with the proposal to spend $200 billion of federal money without an offset, the problem is we just had a $1.5 trillion tax cut bill enacted in December, not paid for. The eventual budget deal that will be struck could add another couple of $100 billion over 2 years to the deficit. We're also going to deal with somewhere between $70 and $100 billion of emergency hurricane and wildfire relief in the next month. That's not going to be paid for. So the problem is that infrastructure will be coming along asking for $200 billion after we've done $2 trillion or so of other budget busting things, and the mood for busting the budget to pay for new things may have run out by the time that the infrastructure comes around trying to collect.
And speaking of the political calculus, the chairman of the House Policy Committee on Transportation announced he's not going to seek re-election. That's Bill Schuster. And in the backdrop, you have a race to succeed him, led by Jeff Denham, Republican of California, and Sam Graves, Missouri Republican. One of those two most likely will be the successor, that if the House does keep the majority after the elections. I recently sat down with Congressman Graves, who is the chairman of the Highway Subcommittee, and this is what he had to say about infrastructure.
Well, it's going to be, there's no real specific details at this point.
Okay.
It is going to be a massive infrastructure bill, though. It's going to include a lot of things, obviously roads and bridges, aviation, water systems, sewer systems, just a lot of everything to do with infrastructure. So it's going to be a very broad plan. Obviously, the administration would like to see $1 trillion worth of investment. We'll see if we can get there. That's a pretty tough lift, but that's one of the things we're waiting on the administration to see what they want to do in terms of the expanse of it, and obviously the funding issue as well.
We've had several senior administration officials, from DJ Gribbin, the infrastructure policy advisor, to the secretary, Elaine Chao, and just now at TRB, some other officials were talking about this plan is going to aim to change the culture, the funding culture. Do you have any insight as to what they're talking about when they're saying changing the culture?
Well, the biggest thing, and it's much like what we would like to see here in the House, and that is the efficiency of the way that programs are implemented. How they're put forth. A lot of programs out there, or funding packages, or the way things are funded. You take TIFIA, for instance.
Yeah.
Trying to make that easier to qualify. Right now, we've found that a lot of the programs that were passed in past highway bills, it's very hard to qualify, very hard to meet the criteria to be able to do a lot of these projects. So we want to see that streamlined, a little bit easier for entities, whether that's states or municipalities, to be able to qualify. And so we're going to do a lot of efficiency work more than anything else. Speed up these projects, make them happen faster.
Before the end of last year, you held a roundtable on freight connectivity. Where do you see proposals to improve access to freight corridors and the mobility of freight in this plan?
Well, as much as anything else, we're going to take a look at the existing programs out there and see how we can make them better. And obviously the most important thing when it comes to moving freight is just making sure that, our system, our transportation system, is the most efficient it can be. We obviously have some issues there. We have a lot of modernization to take place. But what we're going to do is look at those programs we already have and see how much more efficient or how much better we can make them for freight.
And that was Congressman Sam Graves. Check out our full interview with the chairman at ttnews.com, same page as LiveOnWeb. We have a question from a reader. This is from Paul Menig of Tech IM. Will the infrastructure bill be focused on repairing old stuff, upgrading or to current tech, creating a new future, or enabling autonomous vehicles, or all of this? Do we have enough money and guts? That's a poignant question. Jeff, you want to take that?
Of the current White House plan, about 50% of the money will be what they call incentive grants for building new projects that are dependent on state and local partners raising new revenues or private money coming in. And if there's a fairness question. What happens if my state raised taxes last year for transportation? Do I get left out? They're going to look back at how recently states have or localities have raised their new transportation revenue, sort of weighted by how long ago it was, and use that formula. Then another 25% of the money will be geared just towards rural areas, because rural areas generally don't have the tax base or the throughput for tolling or whatever that urban areas do. So that'll be at the discretion of the state governors. Then another 10 or 15% of the money will be for big tickets, new super projects. And then the rest will be for a variety of other programs. So the president's package, the $200 billion that'll leverage another 800, is mostly about new projects, not so much state of good repair. I believe they're hoping that to focus the existing programs that will continue for highways and transit on more of the maintenance and state of good repair issues.
And like you mentioned, there's the likelihood that the Senate autonomous bill could be folded into this. And I like to point out that also the transportation leaders on Capitol Hill, they represent rural areas, so it's very unlikely they're going to be champions of P3s.
Yeah, I remember 10 years ago, after the President's Blue Ribbon Commission on Transportation Policy reported, Steve Heminger, who runs the San Francisco Bay Area MTA, said, find me a Wall Street investment bank that wants to fill potholes in Montana, and then I will agree with you that PPPs are the be-all, end-all. So they'll work in some places, they won't work in other places. So that's why the administration's bill wants to put $50 billion just towards rural areas, because they know that rural areas won't be able to access some of this other money in the bill.
Yes.
I got a question for you, Eugene. You and our fellow government reporter, Eleanor Lamb, have been for some time researching, talking to DOTs and governors of states. I wonder what your sense is on the infrastructure plans they have. Are they still looking to Washington, or are they moving ahead on their own?
Eleanor and I did a project. It comes out next week at ttnews.com. And we talked to every state, and the states that I talked to, the governor's offices, they said that, and this is the age-old tale, that because they don't feel they have a reliable federal partner, because they have to be very alert about how they spend their money, they may have to halt or just pause these projects while they give priority to other projects that are more urgent. And the consensus that Eleanor and I got is that, and what Jeff was saying, all the states that we talked to, they're saying that this is not infrastructure funding is not a problem about new projects. It's a maintenance problem. Is how do you keep these bridges in a state of good repair? Mm-hmm. Let's turn our attention now to regulations. So I turn to you, Eric. Regulations is something that is going to be at the forefront this year. We have Secretary Chow leading the way on an effort to revamp the regulatory structure over at the agency. But nevertheless, we saw the enactment of a rule. This was a long-standing effort to get electronic logging devices. This happened in December. But we have a key deadline coming up in April, on April 1st.
Yeah, the ELD issue has been very contentious, and to kind of oversimplify, it's been a battle between independent operators and some of the bigger trucking companies. Some of the bigger trucking companies already have ELDs and have had for some time. The ELD rule would make it difficult for drivers to cheat on how many hours they're driving. Right now, they're only allowed to drive 11 hours a day and have a 14-hour workday. And there have been problems. Some of the regulators, some of the enforcement people have seen cheating on logbooks. So this is going to supposedly be a lot safer, and it's also going to help in efficiency, some truckers say. The deadline was really December 18th for compliance for every interstate trucker, roughly every interstate trucker, to have an ELD installed on their truck. CVSA, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, the inspectors have given a grace period, so to speak, till April 1st. If you don't have an ELD, you could get a citation or some kind of a violation citation, but you won't be placed out of service. This is a serious violation, so if you don't have an ELD by April 1st, you're going to be placed out of service. I've talked yesterday with Colin Mooney, the head of CVSA, and asked him if they have any feel yet for how the compliance, the state of compliance, and how many violations they're issuing. He doesn't have anything official, but he said he was hearing through the grapevine that there actually have not been a lot of citations issued so far. The enforcement people are laying off of that right now, kind of giving a grace period till April 1st.
There was a lot of pushback on the ELD rule, the December 18th enactment date. The opponents did not see support from the congressional leaders and the White House. They were all in on making sure that we had the ELD rule go into effect. Jeff, looking into 2018, there's no way they're going to reverse this.
No, I think the current deadline is probably baked in the cake. They're going to, but also something just occurred to me that looking down the road, we were talking about gas tax increase earlier. Fuel economy of commercial trucks is increasing, not as fast as cars, but it's increasing. And if we eventually do get more hybrid trucks and someday electric trucks on the road, that's going to decrease the viability of the diesel tax as well as a source of revenue. There's been a lot of discussion about eventually switching away from fuel taxes, going to a vehicle miles traveled tax. And once ELDs are fully implemented, the ability to piggyback on the ELD boxes for a miles traveled tax on trucks would be relatively easy compared to doing it on cars, because commercial drivers have no expectation of privacy for when they drive on the job. That issue doesn't apply. And if the box is already tracking your miles anyway, it would be a fairly cheap system to convert the trucking part of the highway revenue from diesel tax to miles traveled someday, piggybacking on ELD technology, without having to deal with all the various issues of fleet turnover and privacy that exist on the car side. So it just occurred to me.
And that's a good point. Eric, we have a question from Michael Nicholson. Basically, he's asking, can pressure be put on the warehouses to ease the unloading time? I think the point he's making is more about the exceptions. How there's going to be the possibility of tweak the rule or carve out exceptions going ahead. We've already seen some exemptions to aspects of the ELD rule.
Yeah, there have been a lot of exemptions for the ELD rule. And as far as warehousing and loading, there is a study underway to see how many hours truckers are detained while their trucks are unloaded or loaded, which takes from their workday. And so they're kind of waiting on that before they move ahead with any detention regulations or anything like that. It's interesting. There's generally the Trump administration's bent has been to reduce regulations, and they even had some early executive orders saying for every one new regulation you have to get rid of 2 regulations. Yeah. That hasn't happened to that extent. FMCSA has spent some time going back and looking at what they can reduce, what they can eliminate, what they can tweak. They haven't really done too much with major rules. There's a couple of rules right now that are pretty much dead. One is the sleep apnea rule, at least with the Trump administration. Sleep apnea, there was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on sleep apnea that would give medical examiners better guidelines, more clear guidelines as to when a truck driver might be a candidate for sleep apnea. And then they would have to forward them to a test, which can cost money, and a lot of the drivers don't want to pay money for their tests. Some of the companies pay for it. I guess it was about 2 years ago, the administration, it would have been about a year ago, the administration withdrew that advance notice of proposed rule. And from what I've seen, that probably will be dead for the Trump administration for some time, maybe till the end.
And trying to revive that are the 2 senators, the senators from New York and New Jersey. You have Schumer leading the way, and he's a Democratic leader, to get the Trump administration to have DOT proceed with a sleep apnea rule. Based on what we've talked about with the legislative landscape, that looks very difficult.
Yeah, I don't think that the issue was addressed in the pending appropriations bill, and nothing really new on the regulatory scheme is going to get added to that. So they may try to raise it in the next FY19 appropriations process starting this summer. But so much of what's gone on in the posturing leading up to this infrastructure bill is President Trump trying to leverage the New York, New Jersey members for that $11 billion tunnel they want under the Hudson River.
That's right.
And Trump's people playing a very long game of trying to get Schumer on board with the infrastructure bill by withholding that. So everything else on the New York, New Jersey wish list comes in a distant second to getting Uncle Sam to pay for that $11 billion tunnel.
You were referring to the Gateway Project, and for New Jerseyans and the residents of New York City, that's pretty much the gold standard for alleviating congestion and the transit systems. Keeping with the alphabet soup, Eric, aside from ELDs, you have written extensively about CSA, compliance, safety, accountability, and you had a nice scoop that the agency is going to give Congress an updated report on CSA sometime soon.
Yeah, this dates back to the FAST Act, the 2015 transportation law. There was a requirement in there that the National Academy of Sciences do a study on the compliance, safety, accountability program. They took 15 months. They took testimony from FMCSA, from many in the industry. And they issued a report last June. And the major thrust of that report, the biggest recommendation was that they convert their data system to what's called an item response theory. IRT. It's really complicated. It's complicated. One of the first experiences I had with it was an FMCSA official was explaining what the model is. That's a very complex data model, and he was followed by Stephen Bryan, the Vigilo data guy, and he asked in the audience, "How many of you understand it?" And there were no hands that went up. And he said, "After my presentation, you'll understand it. We'll see more hands." He gave a good presentation, but afterwards, when he asked for a support, "Now do you understand it?" there was one hand that went up. This has kind of been the case. It's a very complex system. But
because you're measuring the performance and the safety data of crashes and the performance of these trucks over on our highways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the goal is to find out what each carrier's safety culture is. And this system they liken it to the SAT test. The data on the SAT test is not, you don't get a score determined on how many questions you answer right. It's weighted by, say, might be a really tough math question and then a really easy one. The people who can answer the tough one are the ones that that are really important, and they show a command. It's going to be tough to translate it. The National Academy panel, which was 12 academics who were statisticians and transportation folks, said it would take 2 years to develop this system. So far, FMCSA has been very accepting of it, even though during some of the testimony when the study was being made, they were pretty defensive of the CSA system, which has been criticized, as you know, over the years, but it's been improved. And it's also created a mindfulness of safety. There have been outliers where carriers maybe should have deserved to have a better safety record than the scores might indicate, or vice versa, some bad carriers who never get on the radar. One of the interesting things I saw at the Transportation Research Board was a presentation of an example of how this IRT system might change things. Right now, if you're caught speeding over 15 miles an hour, you would get a high violation score. If you're speeding from 11 to 14 miles an hour, it's a little lower point score for violations. If you're speeding 6 to 10 miles per hour, that's the lowest rating you would get. They did a test run using the item response theory, and actually speeding from 6 to 10 miles per hour was the greatest concern, the highest risk for a safety mishap. And this 15 plus was the least concerning. And one of the reasons for that, they said, was, well, when you're going down the freeway at 6 to 10 miles an hour, you're going to get run over because, you know, most people are not obeying the speed limits these days. If you've been on the freeways, you know, the interstates, you can easily get up to 80 miles an hour with the general traffic flow. So this model, they're going to have to give a report to Congress and to the DOT Inspector General. And they say that soon they're going to have their corrective plan, a start to their corrective plan.
What does soon mean?
Well, we don't know, but it was supposed to technically already be there. But as these things go, agencies take more time to do these kind of things. So, you know, it could be within a few months, I would expect.
And I just want to point out that FMCSA is operating with an acting administrator, the Deputy Kathy Goodrow of the Louisiana Motor Carriers Association, because the nominations in the Senate...
the entire Senate nomination process has fallen apart, and the nominee for FMCSA has been approved by committee, but he's in a long, long line waiting to get to the Senate floor. If Democrats keep insisting that every nominee take the full 30 hours, then conservatives, with some justification, believe if you're going to spend 30 hours a pop, you should concentrate on judges who serve for life rather than lesser subordinate officials. So
exactly. All
the sub-cabinet people are in a long line waiting behind judges to get to the floor.
And it's not just FMCSA, it's other sub-agency at DOT.
And across all departments, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
We have one question here on the regulatory landscape from Bruce Lelton of ILI Worldwide. He writes, with the current executive branch focus on simplification of regulations and codes, how has the FMCSA reduced the regulatory burden?
Well, I haven't seen any reductions in general on important regulatory things. They have appointed a task force to study where they could reduce regulations. That hasn't really happened too much yet. I don't think it's done with its study. So far, most of the recommendations have been for tweaks and haven't been major reductions in regulatory issues.
And any updates on speed limiters, that rule?
That one's been pretty silent. I think that's pretty much dead at least for a while.
It doesn't have a champion in the administration.
It was almost dead on arrival. There was a controversy over it. There had been some support for, say, limiting trucks to 65 or 68 miles an hour, but there were also some controversial studies that were done that said that may not be safer because it could cause trucking blockades.
If all the trucks are going the same speed,
yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be going the same speed as the rest of the traffic.
Correct.
I mean, politically, there's been increases in speed limits all over the country.
Yeah.
70, 75, 80 miles an hour.
Nebraska's calling for that right now.
Yeah, and that they wouldn't be in the same flow as the rest of the traffic, so it could cause some dangerous situations. And trucks would have a harder time passing at 65 miles an hour.
That's right.
So, I mean, there's a pro and con, but this one's pretty much was dead on, almost on arrival, the proposal, actually.
Okay.
Haven't heard anything on speed limiters for a while.
And before we wrap up, Jeff, we're talking about regulations and going back to the infrastructure plan, which I see as the mothership of this whole conversation. DJ Gribbin, the infrastructure policy advisor for the president, he tells everybody who listens to him that the regulatory landscape and streamlining the permitting process is atop one of the peers of the plan.
There is going to be a whole host of proposed changes in laws relating to environmental streamlining, cutting back the regulation about building infrastructure projects in the proposal the president will have within the next few weeks. To the extent that regulations about operating on infrastructure get brought in with getting rid of regulations about construction of infrastructure, who knows?
What about the argument from the ranking members of the policy authorizing committees, DeFazio in the House and Carper in the Senate, that we already have done a lot to streamline the permitting process?
That's a problem. We have the FAST Act in December 2015 signed into law. Title 41 of that had some huge sweeping changes trying to coordinate all the different federal permitting agencies, and we haven't even begun to implement that. So that is a big problem, that we still don't know how effective the massive changes in the law we passed in December 2015 are going to be, and here we are coming out with a new set of proposals to change those laws yet again.
This has been a terrific panel and an informative discussion. We've run out of time, however. I want to thank Jeff Davis with the Eno Center for Transportation, Bill Sullivan with ATA, Congressman Sam Graves of Missouri, and my colleague Eric Miller. If you missed part of the show or would like to rewatch it or replay it, it will be posted on our website, ttnews.com, and on liveonweb.ttnews.com. If you want to learn more about F4A, autonomous trucks, infrastructure policy, and FMCSA regulations, check out our coverage in Transport Topics. I'm Eugene Mulero saying, until next time.